All right. So today's staff training is going to be on this Rolls-Royce 4050 Silver Ghost. It's arguably the most famous model of the Rolls-Royce company line. This company was founded in 1906 by Charles and Henry Royce. A man named Claude Johnson was brought into their partnership for production engineering. And it was Johnson's engineering that debuted this 4050 model in 1907. Johnson nicknamed this Rolls-Royce the Silver Ghost because they designed this car to have exposed metal parts to be silver painted, and the body was finished in silver paint. The Ghost part of its nickname was due to its famously soft, smooth-running engine. And the name Silver Ghost was never officially used by the Rolls-Royce company, but it caught on in the press and it stuck with the public after this vehicle was demonstrated in a series of reliability and endurance challenges across Great Britain. The Rolls-Royce 4050 production lasted from 1906 to 1925 in Great Britain, and in the United States this model lasted from 1921 to 1926 in Springfield, Massachusetts. During this time in Great Britain, this was considered to be the greatest car in the world. So now for specific history on this car. In July of 1913, Alice Longfellow was touring all across Europe in a Pierce Arrow, but she was unhappy with that vehicle and decided to order a Rolls-Royce and ended up with this vehicle. And used this vehicle for the rest of her European tour. In 1914, Alice Longfellow was touring across Austria, Switzerland, and Germany. And during this time, she sort of documented in correspondence letters rising tensions throughout Europe as the beginning of World War I. And Alice and her party arrived in France during the early days of World War I. She had plans to go to the United States, but their plans changed during the early days of the war, and they left for England instead. Alice then eventually left England for the United States, but her Silver Ghost was returned to the Rolls-Royce factory line for adjustments and maintenance. After the requested adjustments were completed, Alice's Silver Ghost was then shipped to the United States. Alice owned this Rolls-Royce until her death in 1928, where it was purchased by Samuel Elliott from her estate. And Samuel Elliott is the creator of the Cricket. That's also here and is currently in that sort of barn area in the state of England. In 1930, Alan C. Bemis, an antique car enthusiast, bought the car from Elliott, and he used the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost for commuting and long-distance trips. In 1938, the Silver Ghost was damaged by a hurricane, and Bemis restored it over the course of 51 years. Bemis then willed the car to our museum September 16, 1986. The Silver Ghost was then loaned to our museum in 1989 with the knowledge that it would be converted into a donation after his passing. Alan C. Bemis died January 7, 1991, and after he passed away, it was formally donated to the museum on February 14, 1992.
Oh, beautiful.
All right, I guess time up. It's funny, I do this every August in front of 1,000-something people, and I'm more nervous right now than I am in August. But I have thoroughly had probably one of the most rewarding educational learning experiences in my life in the last 2 months, diving more into this car. So I'm going to break this down into kind of two parts today. I'm going to start by talking about the automobile, this car as a machine, the Rolls-Royce, because it truly is, for the time period still today, the finest motor car in the world. And then I'm going to get into what I believe to be some extremely historically significant historical context that makes this vehicle not only extremely rare and unique for what it is, but I truly believe, in my personal opinion, this vehicle to me now is an American and world treasure. And it's a survivor that you will never, that you won't believe the story. So first about the car, as Jonah was mentioning, okay, it is nicknamed the Silver Ghost. Officially, this is referred to as the Rolls-Royce 4050, and that model designation refers to their horsepower estimation. Technically, if you do the math, I think it comes out to 48.5. It is a large 6-cylinder engine, just a shy over 450 cubic inches, 453 and a half, plus or minus. And for the time period, if you are, us here, we're able to do this, if you drive vehicles leading up to the Rolls-Royce and drive other vehicles, say a Model T or a Didion Bouton or something like that, comparable to this model, you realize, and there are letters that quote the first experience Alice Longfellow and her group had with this car, and my first experience in riding with this car. This is one of the smoothest, most elegant, quietest, strong, reliable automobiles I've ever been in. And I think Warren, Ground Vehicle Conservator, would relate to that. Rolls-Royce, when they unveiled the Silver Ghost, set out on an over 15,000 mile continuous trip all around Great Britain to prove the reliability and sustainability and performance of this automobile. It was nicknamed the Silver Ghost because the original one was all silver, okay, that Claude Johnson took on the tour, as Jonah mentioned, but it was ghost quiet. And when you drive this automobile, it is that way. The last time I drove it to the 4th of July parade, I always get nervous at a stop sign and noise around me. Is the car still running? Is it not? Did I stall it? You just can't hear it. I almost like to keep the little RPMs on it just so I can make sure it's still running. One thing that these cars are extremely famous for are their strength. They are great hill climbers. They are great long distance vehicles. It's a large engine. It's a large amount of power for the time. It is a low RPM, high torque, smooth running engine. This vehicle has a 4-speed manual transmission. And when you walk around our museum and you see some of the vehicles we've seen, Warren a couple weeks ago did the 08 Sears motor buggy. We've got the Model T with the 3 pedals and other planetary transmissions. It's relatively a modern car in the sense of its brake, clutch, accelerator, 4-speed transmission, and you can readily adapt to driving it. And we'll show you some examples. We'll get close and look at those things in a minute. But I want to open the engine so you can kind of take a look. You turn the mascot to the side, secure your ecstasy, is the nickname of that. And every part of these automobiles and these Silver Ghosts is ornate, is polished, is shown to look the style and quality of what the automobile actually is. As you go through a look at some of these systems, you notice it does have a magneto ignition and battery ignition. It's a 6-cylinder engine with 2 distributors, so it's dual ignition, which you find extremely common on a lot of early automobiles for reliability and backup and smoothness. In terms of starting and operating it, I have hand cranked this car for a large engine. It does hand crank relatively easily. But we've had a lot of support. Warren and the volunteers have done a great job in the last 10 years. We have had some outside support that helped us bring this car back from just not running and demonstrating to right now probably one of, if not the most reliable running, driving, roadable cars in the collection. There was $100,000 today in Portland and you said I had to go there. My best bet would be to go in this Rolls-Royce and back for my success of getting there. I really trust this car that much. We've mentioned before in other cars in starting it about choke to try to get extra fuel up in here. One thing about this carburetor which is neat is it has something that is not a choke but like it called a tickler. And what that is there's actually a little button right there where you hold the float down and it's called quote-unquote tickling the carburetor and you flood it with fuel and then as you crank it, it sucks the fuel back up. A lot of vehicles at this time simply used a gravity feed gas system. Again, the Model T is famous for that. The seat's under the gas tank and the gravity runs down into the car. This does actually have a pressurized fuel system. But to start, you actually have to hand pump the fuel system up. Once it's running, it has its own fuel pump, which is why you want to make sure the gas cap is extremely tight. And this car actually has a special gas cap wrench, so you make sure you get the cap tight because it's a pneumatic pressurized system. It doesn't pull the fuel through with suction. It pressurizes and pushes the fuel through from the back. Again, if you walk around our collection, something as simply as fuel delivery, problems and successes, and how to make your better, mousetrap. You'll see all kinds of examples of pressurized systems, suction fuel systems. We even have an early Mercedes that has using the exhaust gas to pressurize the fuel system, which I don't think is too safe, but that's why we buy
Sounds
that
like it.
car. But this has a tickler fuel system. And if you want to kind of gather around and kind of see some of the controls, I'll come from the back side to kind of show you what we're looking at. It's an extremely spacious body. It's comfortable. It is elegance on wheels, combined with probably one of the most reliable vehicles you can imagine. So there are a few gauges here. There's a clock that you have to wind. It does have a fuel gauge. Again, 1913. This is Rolls-Royce, as regarded as the finest motor car in the world at the time. Oil pressure gauge, light switches, and you could order this with gas lamps, but by 13 they were getting to electric headlamps, 2 switches for battery and magneto ignition. When I run this, I run both on, and you get a better spark and much better ignition. Here is just a pressurized fuel pump, and as I pressurize this, depending on how much fuel you have, you'll notice that the fuel pressure gauge will go up, okay? Again, that's not a fuel gauge, just a pressure gauge. Once you get running, it'll maintain the fuel pressure. When you look at the steering wheel, there are a couple, we kind of call them the Rolls-Royce, kind of call them the Y. One side is your ignition timing, just like a Model T. We say, in America, we say advance and retard, but in England, it's late and early. Okay, so you got to realize which one you're talking about here. So to start this, you put the ignition to early, not late. Remember, you want to be early to start. And then over here is the governor. Okay, this is a secondary fuel throttle control system that will allow a little bit of fuel in there so you can regulate the engine speed when the throttle isn't pressed. So you usually advance the governor a little bit to give it some more fuel as you start, and then as you're driving, based on your individual driving characteristics of how well you handle the vehicle, you adjust the governor. It's a non-synchronized 4-speed transmission, so some people, depending on your driving styles, will have maybe a little more speed on the governor, because the trick with driving a manual transmission without a synchro mesh system that automatically lines the gears up, it's like driving an old farm truck is the best way I can kind of put it. You've got to listen to the sound, and you've got to match the RPMs of the engine to the vehicle speed, and you can kind of change those. That sounds like a very foreign concept, but every single person in America and the world that drove a car in the 30s, 40s, and 50s knew how to, shift a non-synchro mesh transmission, Model A, those different types of things. When I drive it, like to have the governor relatively low, because I like to hear the engine RPMs come up and then come down, and then it's a timing. And honestly, everybody is different, whatever works for you, but when I drive a vehicle like this, whatever song in my head taps out a certain rhythm that I remember from like high school music class, I kind of get that in the back of my head, and I want to shift on the rhythm and shift on the beats, okay? And if you've ever been in music class, in percussion class, and there's the on beat, there's the off beat, there's a double hi-hat, then you shift. It's funny, those things translate to running an automobile. So there is some music to the madness, I guess you could say. Once you're driving, it is extremely, extremely smooth. It's a 4-speed transmission. The first gear almost is unneeded. Originally, prior to 1910, these had 3-speed transmissions, and they added a 4-speed, and I believe the 4-speed was to get a little more top-end speed and performance, because the car does have the power to go. So once you're in first gear and you start moving, you shift as quick as you can. You're out of the gear the second you're in it, 1, 2, 3, and then you're into 4th gear. It has such low-end torque that as you're turning a corner, you necessarily don't have to shift, and it rides and drives extremely well. It's built for real rugged, heavy-duty roads, and even roads in Europe were better than roads in America. Alice Longfellow, when she was ordering the car, noted she wanted what they had was the heavier-duty chassis version, because she wanted to be able to withstand the roads in America when she got it back. The last time I had this out for a long-distance run, we had it at the 4th of July parade, and I took her for a ride across the Dragon Cement Plant flats on the way home. Mostly because I wanted to, well, for fun, but I also wanted to get a lot of air coming from the radiator to get it cooled down for the parade. you know, in high gear, the engine is probably turning 1600 RPM, relatively low, 1800. You almost can't hear it, and I'm chugging right along at 50, 55 miles an hour, and it's stable, and it's strong, and it is just a beautiful car to drive. The clutch, you notice one right here, that Warren has right here. The clutch is always depressed, and there's a stick to hold it down. This vehicle has a very common clutch system at the time, which was referred to as a cone clutch, which basically is, it's a metal disc that's shaped, it's conical shaped, and it is coated with a heavy-duty leather strap, okay? That is when the clutch is engaged, the leather is what is the cushion between the two metal pieces. Depressed means the clutch is engaged and it is separate because they'll stick over time. And every so often, one of the maintenance things we do with this is you put a little oil on the clutch to kind of keep the leather soft so it doesn't dry out, crack, and stick. So if you see older vehicles with a cone clutch in them, you'll see the little sticks because the clutches will sometimes stick. Even modern cars will do that. If they've been sitting a long time, if you've got a 50s automobile or something, you got to rock it to unstick the clutch. And I think that's about it for the kind of basic mechanicals of it. Before I get to the next part, which is more, you know, historical context related. Is there any questions we have right now about specific mechanicals of the car? Yeah, Kayla.
Can I ask about like the look of the car?
Absolutely.
What are the initials that are painted on the side?
Good question. The initials painted on the side are the initials of Alan Demas. He was the final owner of the automobile before it was bequeathed to the museum. And if you look at some of these other cars, the Patrick convertible sedan back here, the restorer of the car put his initials on the side. It's a very common thing to do. Even with cars, some people, personal taste, some people would monogram their cars, monogram their luggage, personalized. It's kind of a good kind of classical sense thing to do, and a lot of people did that. Alice didn't do that, but that's it's quite common. And you notice that on this one as well. That's your question. That's a good question. You know, that's a good question. And the color, I would say the color was chosen currently by Alan Demas. And this is not the original color. So to kind of, that's a good question to launch us into our next thing. In the last couple of weeks, this car has really become what I say is an example of the process that people and organizations really should follow. I really have to give a huge thank you to the National Park Service and specifically the Longfellow House/Washington headquarters in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And Kate down there and their archival department has been fantastic in sending us large troves of documents that we knew they had, but we had never, first time asked for scanned documents of those. They are the keeper of the Longfellow family's estate, their papers and correspondence, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, her father, and Alice's correspondence. So Alice Longfellow was the eldest daughter of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, the famed American poet. One of his most famous poems, The Children's Hour, she's referred to as Brave Alice, and as they got older, Alice Longfellow really was the family figurehead. She was the head of the family, she was the matriarch of the family, and what an amazing person, amazing woman. Her entire life, a philanthropist, educational advocator for reforms, and she was a high society elite. She was friends with Edison, she was friends with Henry Ford, and if you remember, probably Longfellow's most famous collection of poems is Tales by the Wayside Inn. All right, what's the first place that Henry Ford bought when he decided to do his historical preservation? He bought the Wayside Inn to try to turn it into a historical village, which he then turned into his ideas for Greenfield Village, down the road. Alice, when she ordered this vehicle, was on a European tour, which was very common for Americans of a certain social status to go on their European tour. Basically, that means she was there for 2 years plus. Starting in Paris, the goal was to go through Paris into Italy, Genoa, go into Switzerland, Austria, Germany, tour to see various places. While she's there, they're meeting with different individuals she wants to meet and learn from, and during their exploits. I assume she had her first automobile taken over with her. I also believe that in some of the records, which I did not print out, there's a sheet from Rolls-Royce that also highlighted, the cost for renting a vehicle. Well, anyway, in early 1913, she had started with a Pierce Arrow, and she was unhappy with the Pierce Arrow and decided to start corresponding with Rolls-Royce with which to possibly purchase a new automobile. Now, thanks to the Longfellow House and National Park Service, it is amazing the documentation that I've been reading for the last 3 or 4 weeks. They have all the correspondence from the very beginning between Rolls-Royce and Alice Longfellow. And I have them chronologically organized now. And you can read the questions going back and forth. She was heavily involved in designing the automobile. The body is custom built by Barker & Company, a Rolls-Royce chassis, a Barker body. Alice actually wanted it torpedo gray with a brown leather interior. There's even correspondence of her sending back and forth I want this swatch and all these different types of things. Extremely, her personality, she knew what she wanted. She didn't want a standard car. She wanted to order her own. There was arguments about wire wheels. If you look at this Silver Ghost, next to us, a 13 Silver Ghost. That was a 14. That has wire wheels. They're stronger, they're lighter. For some reason, Alice thought that they would change with hot and cold temperatures. The Rolls-Royce agent tries to tell her, no, they're fine. She says, I want wooden wheels, so they put wooden wheels on the car. And that goes back and forth. They sent their driver to England to oversee, at one point, the manufacture of the vehicle. There's payment questions. You paid us. No, we didn't pay you. It's an extremely important piece of documentation from an automobile standpoint. If you just want to look at, if you were going to order one of these vehicles, what's the process? And you can follow that through, which is a unique experience as to how you would about ordering your automobile. All the receipts, the custom order forms she filled out with little pencil checks, and we have all that now, the clean receipts and things like that. Her trip through Europe was one of educational exploration, visitation, learning, and just having an adventure. And while we don't have Alice's letters, the National Park Service has scanned copies of her niece, Edith Thorpe, who wrote on any hotel stationery they could find, but they have transcribed the letters and you can follow them along in chronological order. The anticipation for this vehicle was extremely high. Aunt Alice wanted her new car. She didn't like riding the Pierce Arrow. And even it's funny reading the first sales pitch, how, I guess egotistical is the way you could put it, but I would just say overly confident, where the Rolls-Royce salesman says, ours is the best in the world, even Pierce Arrow knows we're better than them, the press regards us as the finest motor car in the world, and we don't pay attention to what Pierce Arrow is doing because, frankly, we're the best and we know it. So you should have our automobile. They received the vehicle in Genoa, and in my mind, the next part I'm getting to this car is it's a story of adventure, intrigue, romance, exploration, and war. It is an amazing story. First of all, they lost the car. The car got lost. They know it was shipped, it went to Antwerp, and it had to go from Belgium, from France, into Austria, to Italy. Every different European country at the time had a different gauge with the track, had a different rail system, had a different custom systems, and railroad yard workers are just railroad yard workers. They don't care whether they're hauling a carrot of eggs or a car. They were worried about rumors of losing the car from other people. Their chauffeur went riding all around Italy trying to find where the car was. They heard a story about one guy who found his car in a rail yard, and they had no idea what was going on with it, but Pritchell found the car. And these are all laid out in her letters, and they're wonderful to take a look and read, and you're welcome to. And sorting out the car, learning to drive it. Alice was waiting. She wanted to enter Rome in her new car. They were waiting outside of Rome for the car to arrive for weeks. And they finally went through Rome. There's evidence that there was a little dust up with a horse cart or a wagon cart on a muddy road, and they swerved and zagged. There had an incident where they popped a tire and needed a new rear spring, and Edith Thorpe, her niece, felt, it's funny, she wrote in her letter that she was really upset with the chauffeur, and she says that, how can a man not know how to fix a car? And she said some choice words to him, but eventually he couldn't fix it, and Rolls-Royce sent a person out back to help fix the car in Italy. And then in her next letter she says, I guess I was wrong, perhaps I was too harsh on Pritchell, and he was the chauffeur. It's very interesting that they mentioned in the letters from an educational standpoint today, obviously the theories of the Montessori school system and the Montessori school philosophy. She was an Italian educational teacher. They had scheduled meetings to meet with Dr. Montessori while they were in Italy and all their adventures. What's interesting is, to put this in the context of the world of 1913-14, the best thing I can say is if you haven't read The Guns of August, it's a great place to read up on this. The world is about ready to explode into the Great War, or the First World War as we know it today. Tensions are high. Every nationality is looking for how to protect themselves. The impending storm is coming. There's even a letter from Rolls-Royce sending Alice her new insurance card for the next remainder of her trip, dated May 11th, 1914. She went to Austria, they went into Germany, but I find it interesting to note that they crossed out in red on the insurance card Germany and Austria. Okay? If people didn't think something was coming, then I believe they were kind of foolish. The question was when and how. Austria's Franz Ferdinand is assassinated in Sarajevo in June the 28th. We have a letter between them and Rolls-Royce and one of Edith's letters on June the 23rd. They're getting ready to leave Italy. They go into the Italian Alps, Austria, Germany, and then the letters pick up. It gets really interesting how they mention there's a letter that gets out to Edith Thorpe's father, who's a relation to Alice Longfellow, that it says, "We arrived in Paris August the 3rd. We were lucky to get here." They were in Germany. They were allowed to get over the border. The First World War officially is declared. Germany against France, late July on the 27th, 1914. They're in Germany. They mention in letters that his brother is still in Berlin. They haven't heard of him. They mention how upset they are that Germany invaded Luxembourg, which is a neutral country, and that's just horrible. You definitely pick up on the feeling of the times that they are sympathetic towards the French cause, not the German cause, and there is, and they actually put it in her letters, their words, not mine, the hatred for Germany at that time in the context of the First World War. Okay, so these are their words, not mine. Paris at the time, Jonah mentioned they were in Paris and trying to get out. Paris is a chaotic city. They're mentioning how when they first get there that it's full of enthusiasm and esprit de corps and everyone's trying to get to the front, but Paris is also full of panic because everyone in Paris at the time always remembers 30 years ago war, the Franco-Prussian War, France was pretty much, and Paris was surrounded by the German army, or the Prussian army at that time. They mentioned that they don't know if they're going to lose the car, whether they're going to go or not. They hired the car in a garage at the hotel so the car is in requisition. Because every man 20 to 50 years old is being conscripted off the streets and thrown into a train or thrown up to the front lines. Every automobile is taken. They mentioned that we have enough gas to get to Le Havre should we have to, but we don't know right now, we're kind of staying. They mentioned how when they first get to Paris, there's a lot of joy and national pride, and the war's coming, but within a week it gets very solemn and quiet, and the trains are chaotic, and everyone realizes of the impending war coming. There's a high sense of pride, but everyone is getting solemn and really, really surreal about the situation coming. They also mentioned that martial law is declared. So they're in France, martial law is declared, they're worried about getting finances, they're worrying about money, how are we going to get out? And eventually they get passes to leave because, as they note in the letters also, that no matter who you are, if you're stopped without passes or a passport to leave a city, to go to a city, you're going to be declared a German spy. And those fears were readily available. They managed to get to Le Havre. In their letters they note that as his car was leaving Paris and trying to drive to Le Havre, France on the coast, they flew a British flag on the front and a French flag on the back along the roads, which were double-lined with soldiers marching up to what they called the frontiers, which is the Belgian border and the Alsace-Lorraine region, and also the Ardennes forest. And as they drove, you can just imagine thousands of soldiers cheering as Alice and her crew rode by with the flags of the British and the French flying. They get to Le Havre, and it is a chaotic cluster, of just the British are trying to get all the troops over as fast as they possibly can. No one knows whether you're going or coming. You're not allowed to leave a city or a town without that person's magistrate's permission, so they have to get all these passports. They're able to find a hotel, but that's as far as they can go. In the middle of the night, according to the letters, their chauffeur happens to hear from a guy who heard from a guy who knows someone that Americans can get on this boat leaving tonight, but you've got to go. They rush to get passports, and they note in their letters that we are lucky to get on this boat because that same evening, martial law is declared in Le Havre, and all residents of hotels and boarding houses are thrown into the street because all rooms are used for incoming soldiers. And they also mentioned that you can't go back to Paris because you're not allowed to leave, and you can't stay in Le Havre because you're not allowed to be there, and no one has a place to sleep, and it's a very chaotic, tumultuous time. The mobilization for war, and they're caught up in that. They get on a boat, and of course now you got to cross the English Channel, and the fear is the U-boats, and they're escorted out in their troop ship by torpedo boats. Her niece even notes in there that they stop in the middle of the night, and it's all quiet, and there's a gray boat on the horizon, and everyone has that feeling in their chest of, oh my gosh, what's going on? And they realize, the guy yells over, and it's a British boat, and they go, oh my God, thank God, it's okay. But there was extreme fear. So to say that this vehicle, is a survivor of the First World War is literally true, because every vehicle is being sequestered, taken, seized, and used for the war effort. And they're trying to get troops and generals as fast around as they possibly can. Some are used for ambulances and things like that. Once they get back to Great Britain, their vehicle goes back to Rolls-Royce. Alice was extremely picky. There were things on it that she liked, a lot of things she didn't like. If you notice in the windshield right here, there's this little wood panel. If you look at the photo we have of her when she first got in Italy, this wood panel doesn't exist, and the windshield is a little lower, and she had complaints about the windshield. If you look at the photograph of her sitting in Ellis Road here, and her entourage, her niece, and her other people, a friend rode back there. If you look at the photo of Alice, which we look at after, she's a really tall, strong woman, and her head is a little bit above the windshield. So you can see why she would complain about that. And even now, this looks a little overly straight and high. They adjusted that for her. They completely serviced the automobile, and eventually it came back to the United States in the early 1950s. They sailed back on the Saxon, a Cunard liner. Alice